All right. Hello and welcome to our virtual stage crew series here. We've got Rachel McPhee Benson with us today, joining us from New York City. I'll let her go into her whole backstory, but we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. And let's just start with how you got into theater.
Well, thank you for having me very much. I am from Wisconsin, so Wisconsin, and I went to high school. I grew up in Wisconsin. I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, so Wisconsin holds a very, very, very dear place in my heart. And Zane and his wife Emily and their new little guy Gorham are dear friends of myself and my husband. So I am very, very happy, excited, and honored to be here. So thank you. In terms of how I got into theater, so my father was the managing artistic director of a community theater in Racine, Wisconsin called the Racine Theater Guild. So I basically have I grew up like going to rehearsal and like instead of having a babysitter, I would just go to rehearsal, which I'm sure was great for everybody involved. And I would just basically like watch all the shows, be hanging around in the shop all the time. As soon as I got old enough, I started auditioning for the shows. And then, yeah, I mean, I truly never thought about being anything other than an actor. Like to this day, I am shocked when you're asking somebody younger than you, what they might want to study in school or what they might want to be when they grow up. I'm like shocked that not everybody says actor, just because I grew up in it. My dad was a director and actor. And so, yeah, I was in all the school plays and decided I wanted to study that in college and then studied in England to, get even more theater training under my belt. And then moved to New York City. I don't know. Was that enough info? What else should I
Oh
say?
yeah, no, that's pretty good basics of how you got into it. A couple of questions like that people have asked when we're doing these is like, so what's one of the first shows you remember going to or like seeing from backstage? Or like, is there a couple of favorites that really stand out?
Yeah, I don't know if this is a favorite, but I do remember being at many rehearsals for this French farce, which I was like probably like four. And I was at rehearsals for this like French farce called Cat Amongst the Pigeons, like real appropriate for a 4 year old. But I just remember like everybody running in and out of doors and a lot of physical comedy. And it was just so funny that even as a 4 year old, even though I had no idea like this sort of scatological subject matter and like people kind of running around scantily clad. Like it was just the sheer like physical comedy of it. That really struck me. Um, I also remember I mean, I just my they did at my dad's theater, they probably did about 10 shows a year. And from like the age of 4, I was like in the audience of them. So I mean, there's just so many. Like Little Shop of Horrors. I remember I saw every performance of that and I was like probably like 6 or 7. Again, really appropriate material. Um, I remember like the Taffetas. Oh my gosh. And Emily, Zane's wife, was in a production of the Taffetas, but I was obsessed with the Taffetas. I went to every performance. I like listened at that time. We listened to tapes. And it's interesting because I love musicals and those are the shows I remember seeing the most. And I used to do musicals, but now for whatever reason, I don't do musicals. So that's sad. But oh, and the first show I ever saw, actually, I'm remembering it clearly now. The first show I ever saw, my grandma took me to, and it was at Okoboji Summer Theater in Iowa, and it was South Pacific. And I vividly, vividly remember that.
Nice, that's
So
cool.
yeah, musicals basically.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good place to start. That's where a lot of us all start, and big memories coming from there for sure. Um, so do you want to just take a little time and talk about your kind of education and career path, like how you made that choice? It sounds like, I mean, you were pretty kind of set on it, but like how you negotiated picking a school, kind of continuing your education, and some of that stuff.
Yeah. So I was always really active in acting and theater classes, like from even probably the age of like 7 or 8. Was always doing after school stuff that way. And then every summer I would do like extensive like theater camps. And then when I got into high school, I started getting a little bit more serious about it. So I would go to the Milwaukee Rep did a bunch of classes at that time. They had a program. It was new then. It probably isn't new anymore, but well, if they still do it, called Teen Works. And it was really focused on like scene study, but then also writing your own work to perform as well. And that was like the whole summer. And it was like every day, like 9 to 5, really intensive. And I think that's where I really started sort of learning and understanding that creating a role or working on a script isn't just like willy-nilly. Like there is like a technique to it, maybe like a science. There's like a process essentially. And I think that's how I started developing my process and my approach to the work. And then from there, in terms of school, yeah, it was funny because I when I was applying for college, that was my one time in life when I thought that maybe I would do something other than acting. There was like a brief blip where I got really interested in like politics and thought that maybe I would be a lawyer. Um, so I went and I toured like DePaul there to learn more about their conservatory program, and I learned more about the theater program at the University of Minnesota, and looked into a couple more conservatory programs, and a lot of them said that that you could like get kicked out like after the first year in the conservatory program. If they didn't like or didn't feel you were progressing in a certain way, they could kick you out, and that freaked me out. And I was like, so I'm gonna go to like school, and then they can just decide they want to kick me out of this program, and then I'm gonna be high and dry. So then I was like, oh, I don't know. I need to go to a good school that has other options where I could potentially study other things in case I maybe change my mind. So I applied to University of Wisconsin-Madison, got in there, and then of course, like immediately abandoned any ideas or plans to be a lawyer. That was very short-lived. I don't know what that was about. It was
Good
during,
backup plan though.
yeah, no, and now sometimes too, I'm like, why did I let go of that? Um, so yes, then I went to University of Wisconsin. Freshman year, auditioned for my first show, which was called Out of Our Senses, and it was like a children's show, but it was not at a children's theater. It was one of those things that doesn't really make sense, but you just do the show because you want to do the show. And then yeah, just took a lot of theater classes at UW, did a lot of shows, and truly, I actually feel this is sort of a side note, but I feel like I gained the most education about actually like by actually being in shows. Like classes are great, but for me, all the experience of like working with other people and actually like being in the show um, was really where I just feel like I learned how to do it, I guess. Um, and then, yeah, then graduated. Well, in my senior year at Madison, we had a really cool thing that they did where they would do like almost like 3 weeks. They'd take a group to London and you'd see shows like every day, sometimes twice a day. And you'd write papers about what you saw and you'd go to class. And you got I think you got 3 credits for this. And then you obviously got to like stay in the UK and like see all these amazing shows. So when I was there, I basically fell in love with London, England. And I was like, I have to get back here. I have to find a way to get back here. I love it. I'm obsessed. So my senior year, I applied to a couple of like postgraduate acting programs in the UK. And then I ended up getting into one at the Drama Studio London in London, which is then where I spent a year after I graduated college. Um, and subsequently, that's also where I met my husband. So if for nothing else, but that was very much like very rigorous, like classical training, lots of like Shakespeare, lots of focusing on like text work, really extensive like physical training almost. Like I remember like running around these studios for like hours just to become like so like physically fit and adept and ready to do anything and dance and period movement and um stage combat and sword fighting, and it was truly probably one of like the best years of my life because just all day every day it was just doing anything and everything related to acting and theater.
Nice. And was there like a performance aspect to that program, or was this
Yeah.
like very much just training? So
Yep, there was a performance aspect. We did I want to say things were broken down into like maybe like month-ish long chunks, and then at the end of those chunks we do a play. So we did like a Shakespeare comedy and a Shakespeare tragedy. We did like a contemporary comedy, contemporary tragedy. We did some period pieces. We did like restoration. And yes, there was like you do like a couple of performances at the end of each sort of unit, I guess you could say, that were like fully memorized, fully costumed, fully designed, people watched, etc.
nice, awesome. So could you talk a little bit about what you're doing these days, and what you're doing 6 months ago at this point, and just like a little bit about working in the industry in New York, and like your work as an actor, and then like your work as a producer and all that, like.
Yeah. So yeah, I moved to New York, and I'll take us back a little bit to get to the present. I moved to New York in 2006, and immediately started auditioning. Did some shows right away, and then really decided that I wanted to be able to make my own things with friends. So a friend of mine who's also friends with Zane, or sorry, Mr. Unlow. I'm sorry, I'm like probably
Oh,
so
it's only
unprofessional, right?
Zane.
I'm so
No,
unprofessional, everybody. I'm so sorry. Um,
no, nobody calls me Mr. Enlow down
okay,
here.
that was
It's
actually
the
so
first
weird
time
when
they've
I
met
said
me,
it. Like
maybe.
I was like, this is not right. Um, so so then yeah, started sort of creating my own work with other colleagues and people that I'd gone to school with, which was something that I never thought that I would do, but actually really loved and enjoyed and was really good at, and continued to produce and create my own work to this day. And I think that's one path. I mean, I don't know how things are different now educationally, but I think that that is one thing that I wish could have been highlighted in my education, was that you can have control of your own career in certain ways by being able to produce and create your own work. And also, as time has gone on, a lot of like the people that I admire the most wear multiple hats in the industry, are directors, writers, producers, etc. So I wish that that had been like drawn out for me a little bit earlier, but I'm glad that I came to the realization of that when I did. So anyway, had a theater company for a couple of years, auditioned, was also, oh, we have a surprise guest that's just going to say a quick hello.
Hey, Rob. Hey,
And my
Reggie.
1-year-old Reggie. Say hi to Zane. Rob is also an actor, writer, and voiceover artist. Reggie is one. Right? You saying hi to everybody?
Oh, yeah.
Hi. Hi. Oh, okay, now we're going to say bye. Say bye-bye. Yeah. Thank you for that interlude. What was I talking about? Making my own work. Another thing that has surprised myself about my career is that I have such like a strong theater background. Like I have done so much theater, and I thought I would just continue to do theater, but with the rise of things like Netflix and streaming shows, the majority of the work that I have done and the majority of the things that I audition for are actually film and television productions, which is just again something that I just never thought of. Which seems weird, but I always just thought I would do theater. I love theater. That's like my first love, and that's where the bulk of my experience comes from. So I think that just I again like wishing that in my education more like all the ways that we can work in the business would have been drawn out, like voiceover, commercials, video game voices, even like being able to like be a standardized patient, like all the ways that you can use your sort of artistic creative theater training in other industries and in other ways. was something that I wish would have been highlighted to me earlier in my journey, but I'm glad that I know these things now. Anyway, so 6 months ago, what was I doing? I was auditioning. Um, I had a 6 month old. So I filmed like my first, like a short film, which was like the first day, like being on set and being away from the baby. And was just really starting to get back into like auditioning a lot after just having like a newborn. And then COVID happened and all of that stopped. I have participated in like a couple of like Zoom readings. And the thing that I have been getting into the most now is getting more into the world of like voiceover and voice acting. I recently recorded 12 different characters for like an audio drama podcast, which was really fun. And yeah, so things in New York City are slowly coming back. Auditions are for film and television, no theater here as of yet, but film and television things are slowly happening. They have a lot of restrictions in place, like COVID compliance officers on set, and limiting the amount of people on set, and PPE and testing happening like daily, and quarantining before participating in a project. I also, what else did I do during the height of COVID? I filmed like a small commercial from home, like via Zoom. So, just really like interesting ways that people have continued to make things continue to happen during this time. So yeah, I'm interested to see where it will go and kind of what will happen next. Uh, Definitely the amount of auditions has been picking up. So we will we will just see what happens.
Nice. Yeah, on that note, you're talking about like doing more commercial stuff, more TV and film than you really anticipated. Like, how does that audition process vary? Like I guess, how do you even navigate between the two? It's not something I've ever done personally.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think that that's one thing where I've taken like a couple of like technical classes on that. But that's again one thing I've just sort of learned more about by doing, and just getting used to like watching myself and seeing if I'm conveying what it is I think want to convey, or if it's too much. Like it's really just literally about like studying myself on, like recording myself doing something and then watching it back to make sure that that's like what I want to portray, and then sort of training myself to know how to do that. That's a terrible explanation of a process, but I think I think it's very different from theater, very very different. Um but then there are also things that are still, I mean, and it's interesting because I actually sort of like TV and film a little bit better now, only because you can get something just the way you want it, and then it's like that forever, and you don't ever have to like worry about having to recreate it. However, that is the beauty of theater, is that it's never going to be the same. It's going to live in the world of sameness, but it's always going to be a little bit different, which is that beauty of it. But in my old age, sometimes I'm just happy to be like, oh, cut and print. That was perfect. That's just the way I want it. Now I can forget it. I never have to remember that again.
No.
That was sort of like a side note, but yeah, I mean, and the audition process is a bit different. Sometimes when you're auditioning for like, especially for theater, or excuse me, for TV and film, a lot of times you're in the office and you're just reading with the casting director, and they are not an actor, and they are literally just like blah, 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 like giving you absolutely nothing. So not only are you creating the inner life of your own character and doing everything you need for your own character, you're also having to like imagine and create. It's almost like doing a monologue. Like you have to imagine all the other circumstances and the other person that you're talking to, and all of that down to a T, because you are getting absolutely nothing from whom you are auditioning with. Whereas in theater, I think there is a little bit more of an effort to have the person auditioning with you be an actor, or at least be reading with some sort of an emotion
Active
to play off
participant.
of. But then also it's kind of a bummer sometimes too, because you're like, Well, the fun of acting is doing it with somebody else and sort of reacting and feeding off of what they're giving to you. But if it's like I'm inventing everything in my head, then I'm kind of like acting with myself. Um, that was again a segue. Um, I don't know. I probably didn't answer this question very well.
No.
But there's also usually more people in the room when you audition for theater, as
Mhm.
opposed to like for film and television show. Usually it's just like the casting director and you, they put you on tape and then they send it off, and you probably won't meet the director until you're on set that day. Sometimes you might meet them beforehand if it's like an extensive callback situation, but um you also typically for like TV and film, a lot of the times you don't know a lot about the project when you audition for it. Whereas a lot of, theater roles, if it's a revival, you know what that is. Or you have access to like a full script. A lot of times in like film or television, you just don't, and you're kind of just guessing, making
Mhm.
educated guesses, which is different and something that I've just like picked up along the way.
Mhm. Um, I guess open calls are more of a thing for like musicals, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not
Well,
like, is
there's
that still like, I've always
yeah.
kind of assumed that that was a bigger difference between like TV and film, like more.
Yeah, musicals and like theater. I would say even, straight theater for lack of a better term, just theater that isn't
Mhm.
musicals. I there, pre-COVID, there definitely were still like open calls going on for that. But yeah, and that's the other thing too, is like theater and or excuse me, TV and film is just it's a little more like closed. There's like smaller numbers. It can be harder to get those auditions and to know about
Mhm.
those sort of things. Um but yeah, the open calls are definitely like they still happen. It will be interesting to see what happens to that after COVID.
Mhm.
And now everything has moved so much into self tapes. So even for auditioning for theater or musicals, people are filming themselves at home and then sending them off to the casting director, et
Mhm.
cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if that will be something that stays after COVID, just because it probably saves people time, money, um, etc. Though, which it's great for convenience, but then it also kind of loses a little bit of that human element and that interaction with somebody in the room
Mhm.
and being able to be redirected by another person. When you sometimes film an audition, it's like, again, you're just making these educated guesses. You don't have anybody to say, oh, I like that, but think about this, which again is one of the beautiful things about acting and creating things with other people. So it will be interesting. I think that it might move more into the virtual audition world. Though there have been like I think what you guys have done like a Zoom audition, or what did you guys do for your auditions? Did you do like did people send like a monologue, or did you do like a live over
It's
Zoom
it's
auditioning?
mostly been submissions. I think there's been a couple people that have done more like a Zoom thing that just like we're more comfortable doing, having a little bit more interaction and feedback to get going, especially for a couple people that are new to the program. But for the most part, people have been, recording themselves and submitting that way, and then going from there.
Yeah, and it's been a mix here of that too. There have been some of those like sort of like, Zoom auditions, and but a lot of taping yourself and then sending it.
Mhm. Cool. Could you tell us a little bit more about like your producing and like the theater company stuff and like working on Deadshot Mary and like you and
Yeah.
Rob getting that off the ground and like really doing that whole thing on your own, I think is really cool and something that
Yeah.
I'd like to hear about.
Yeah, definitely. So I had a theater company from with some friends from 2008 to 2013. Very successful, great theater company. Zane won an award for his wonderful set design with said theater company, and did a lot of different shows. Worked with so many great people. Really, so proud of every production that we did. And then, theater is an all-encompassing thing, and you know people's people's goals change, people's journeys change, and so it just was decided that it would probably be best to everybody kind of move on and explore their own avenues. And so after that, I sort of focused on my own personal auditioning more and sort of leaned into more of my acting work as opposed to producing work. in that period, I had always told my husband, who's a writer, actor, and voiceover artist, and you just saw him with Baby. He did a solo show that he wrote for himself, probably about 10 years ago now. So I always told him that I wanted to do a solo show, but I didn't want it to be a solo show where it was just me being like, I'm me, look at me, woo woo, which there's nothing wrong with those shows. Like, I actually love those shows, but I just didn't want to do that type of one. So he said, okay, well, I'll know it when I see it. I will know it when I see it in terms of what your solo show is going to be. So, in doing some research for another project, he stumbled upon this woman named Mary Shanley, who was a police detective in the NYPD during the 1930s. And he found this really striking image of her, which was this woman wearing like a hat and gloves and pearls and a purse, but she had like this gun and this like really like stern expression on her face. So we started doing more research about her, and it turned out that she was one of the first women to make first grade detective in the NYPD during the 1930s, which who even knew? I did not even know that was a thing women did during the 1930s. And then just learned so much about her. She was kind of like a B-list celebrity. She was like in the papers all the time, and she was always like chasing down crooks. And she made like over 1,000 arrests, which I don't know anything about anything, but that's apparently like a staggering amount of arrests. And then unfortunately, she had an alcohol problem, and she went into a bar one day and she shot a bunch of holes in the wall. Not great, was demoted, but did manage to work herself back up again. Again, this was like the 40s, so, you know. But we also met some of her family members after doing our own research and got more insight to her and who she was. And it was just a really fascinating story. And so my husband decided he wanted to write my one woman show about Deadshot Mary. That was her nickname in the papers. So yeah, he wrote the show. I did a workshop production of it. You know, like I found the theater, I hired all my designers, hired my director, raised money, did a workshop of it. People liked it, decided that I wanted to do a longer run of it. So about a year later, I booked a theater in New York for 6 weeks, hired a press person, again, like hired my designers, hired my director, and got to work to create this show that I really wanted to do to bring this story to life, and to also, you know, promote myself and for my own career. So yeah, that has been a great experience, and that's another thing that has led me to other opportunities. For example, off the back of that, I was invited by the NYPD to perform at their International Women's Day Symposium. Every year they do a Women Honoring Women conference to honor all the women of the NYPD. So I got invited to perform there, and Gail King was speaking that day. So I got to meet her. Very cool. Not something I ever thought I would do. I also performed the show at various theaters in upstate New York. And then last year, 2 years ago, I don't know, I did it in Wisconsin, in my hometown of Racine, Wisconsin. And, you know, we'll continue to do that show. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about that other than it continues to be sort of like my calling card. It's something that I'll be able to do no matter how old I am. And something that really seems to resonate with people, just in terms of, I think people, especially now, like stories about kind of like badass women, for lack of a better word, or women who were trailblazers in traditionally male dominated fields. And it was really cool because I got to meet a lot of old school female police officers who had really interesting stories and were really inspiring people. And yeah, again, just not something that I ever thought would be part of my journey. And now it is. And then also off the back of that, my husband wrote a pilot based on her life, and sort of has an outline of what a television series might entail about a female police officer and her female police partner in New York City in the 30s and 40s, which I don't know, I think would be a cool show.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just like, you know, I've been open to a lot of possibilities and then just kind of gone with them and embraced the fact that there might be risk involved. But one of the things that we learned at the Drama Studio London, which is where I did my postgraduate training, was that if you're going to do something, go for it. And if you go for it fully, and then if you fail, you will fail gloriously. So that's kind of basically how I've tried to live my life, to just kind of go for it. Because, hey, the worst that can happen is that you're going to fail gloriously. So this represents a success, though. So
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about, like coming from that production, like doing the back end stuff of it, like versus the, you know, on stage portion that was like more of a challenge or was really an eye opener on that like on stage, backstage, off stage sort of dynamic that goes on? Like, is there anything that you found to be like something that you really liked from that aspect of it that you'd never really done before, or something that you like found a new respect for that you didn't really understand the process of before?
yeah, I think, one thing I was sort of kicking myself as I've gone around and done this at other places, that I haven't had the greatest vocabulary for sound and lighting stuff. And I wish that, and now it's getting better. Like, I basically know how to do Q lab myself. I can write cues. I've taught myself how to do that because I've needed to take my sound cues are a really important part of my show. So when I take it other places, I'm able to have people run the sound for me. But not everybody knows Q lab, particularly if you're at like an older theater where, like, maybe that's not the system they use. So I wish that I would have had more of a vocabulary for that. And I'm glad I have that now, but that is one big regret. I wish that I would have done a little bit more behind the scenes work, in my sort of theater education, because all of it is so important. I know the actors are the ones on the stage, but these actors don't do anything. You know what I mean? It's truly everybody else. And I wish that, and yeah, it's true. The acting is the least of it, honey. Like, all you got to get up there and know those lines. That's it. Everybody else is making you look good, so you better be nice to them all. But anyway, I digress. Huge appreciation for technical theater, like huge, especially after having to teach myself Q Lab. I was like, why the heck did I never know how to do this? I'm a bad person, bad artist. Anyway, another thing that was interesting during Deadshot Mary in particular was sort of dealing with getting some bad reviews. That was interesting. Basically, I got hundreds of great glowing reviews. I sold out the show. We made money off of the show, which is literally unheard of in New York City. Like, basically, you're lucky if you break even for what you put into a show. We made money. The show was a success. I got probably 2 bad reviews, and guess what sticks with me? The bad reviews. So, just learning how to just deal with that and be like, it's one person's opinion, who cares? Whatever. That was something that was, I don't even know how you can teach people to deal with that. I think it just has to like happen to you, and
Yeah.
then you go, whatever, moving on. I think that, what else? Oh, I think one thing that's been really always challenging about doing theater, especially in New York, is that there's so much competition. So making sure that you even have audience is incredibly challenging. And just thinking up new ways to get people there, get out the word about the show, entice people to want to see your show, what makes your show stand apart. That is one thing that is really hard, and I have a lot of admiration for people who really know how to do that. And yeah, that's one of the trickiest things about doing theater at a small level in New York City.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Well, great. That covers a lot of it. What type of advice would you have for people that are kind of following a similar career path, like either acting or producing, and kind of like especially if people are looking at picking a program to go into, or just like even just trying to stay active with theater as like a fun kind of side gig for a long time. Like what would you encourage them to do, or like anything that you'd make boxes to check or avoid?
Yeah, I would just say like see as much theater as you can, read as many plays as you can. Also like watch TV shows and movies, and just like have like a language and a vocabulary for all of that kind of stuff. I mean, hey, it's like enjoyable, right? And also like un, get an understanding of like what your taste is. Like what do you like and why do you like it? What don't you like and why don't you like it? And be able to talk about that and articulate that. I'd also say like practically and logistically, if you are, going into particularly probably acting, I would say that and I think some of the other like technical design or stage management type roles, find something that you can do to make money that is extremely flexible, like learn how to be a great website designer, because you can do that on the side and like make money for it while you're pursuing your other stuff, which might be few and far between. Or maybe like be a like an accountant or a bookkeeper, something freelance like that, where you can make like a solid living so you don't have to worry about that, so you can choose the jobs you want to do and don't have to worry about if there's a break in between your acting or stage management or lighting design work. That would be like a logistical piece of advice. In terms of training, I truly think the on stage training is the best. Like I personally don't think it matters like where you get your degree. And I think I think that as things are changing in the sort of entertainment community, I do think where you get your degree is going to matter less and less and less. Because I think people are trying to be more inclusive now and not have it be so like, oh, you went to Yale or Harvard, you're going to have the or NYU, so you'll have access to the best jobs. So I think that a place you can go to school and get a lot of like practical training would be my advice. Maybe a school that has like a regional theater attached to it, because that could then be, a way into already having employment when you're done. Stuff like that. That would be practical advice. Um, and then I would just say like remember it's like fun. Like it's like one of the only jobs that's literally supposed to be fun. And why else would you do it if not to just have it be fun? So if it ever gets to a point where it's like not fun, take like a break or a breather and see if it's something that you miss. You probably will find out that you do. But yeah, I think that's my little like it's supposed to be fun.
Nice.
Don't stress out.
Yeah, for sure. We touched on this a little bit, but like, how do you see the industry changing as we move forward? Like both just technology wise and like how the industry was changing, and then like COVID and like the changes you see happening and what you think might kind of hang around and stay with us for a extended period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think the trend towards self-taping is going to stay, which I think in some ways, in terms of like inclusivity, opens things up a lot more. Like a person in Wisconsin could feasibly audition for a Broadway show because it doesn't matter where you are, because you're sending your audition off to them to watch. I think that will definitely stay around. I think that, um, what else do I think will stay around? Voiceover will definitely continue to be a big thing. I'm seeing more things for like even like audio dramas and podcasts that are, plays or dramatic and fictional, as opposed to like a docu-style podcast. I think, what else do I think? I think that there'll be a lot more like outdoor type work in the coming year. I actually really wanted to do an outdoor production, but the actors equity rules are so strict in New York City that it would have just been virtually impossible even to get like a group of people to do some Shakespeare in like a park somewhere. They are working on this open air act right now though that's going to allow theater companies to perform and rehearse in open air spaces like for the spring and the summer. But I think that and I think there'll be a lot more like experimentation in terms of theater stuff. Um, like one of my friends is a professor at Davidson College, and they did like a whole outdoor like drive-through experience,
Hmm.
which I thought was kind of cool for a theater show. What else do I think? I think projects will remain small probably for a little while. Um, Yeah, those are my predictions thus far.
Mhm. And what about anything just like pre-COVID, like how the technology is changing? Like, what do you see? Do you see any of those changes like coming? Do you notice them as much as an actor? Like we were talking with a couple of our other guests, like one works in lighting and they're doing a lot of like virtual design work and like pre-production stuff that's like taking that out of the room, and like kind of saving time and money on that aspect. And, like the inclusion of video in a lot of like theater pieces.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I've
Mhm.
noticed a lot of that, and I've noticed the use of projection. That was one thing I was really noticing a lot happening over the past year. And yeah, I definitely think that'll continue to happen. And I wonder if people will um utilize Zoom more as maybe or even like streaming like the success of like Hamilton being streamed in its format as like a theater show. That seems to be something, and that was happening a bit before this, like people being able to like stream Broadway shows like on PBS or whatever. But I think that will actually explode, and that might then become part of your contract when you're in a show to also have like the
Mhm.
have it videoed. Yeah, that's really interesting about the pre-production thing. I didn't know that. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like from like a performance end what I mean, one thing that's happening like in terms of my husband like pretty like successful voiceover artist, and one thing that's crazy is that being people are now just like recording their voiceovers from home, but like with like the director or the client who's hiring you for it, and they're using a system called Source Connect where the computers are just talking to each other and they're recording your voiceover like from their computer and wherever they are. That was happening a little bit before as well, because also, yeah, it saves time, it saves money. Um,
Just the travel costs alone, like.
yeah, exactly. So, I think that'll continue. I think that was already happening, and that will just continue more and more. Trying to think of other like technology things. Um, and yeah, definitely like the use of video within theatrical stuff. Definitely have
Mhm.
noticed that becoming very prevalent even before COVID.
You mentioned actors equity there too, and that's something that we haven't really talked about much, but like all of these trades kind of have their own union. And if maybe you could kind of just give us like a little brief thing about the union or like.
Yeah. So I'm a member of both Actors Equity and also SAG-AFTRA. So Actors Equity is the union for stage performers, and SAG-AFTRA is the union for television, film, and radio performers. Basically, it's just uh, providing a set of like rules and guidelines so that the conditions that you're working in and the pay you're working for is fair. And if both entities allow for health insurance if you make above a certain amount, and trying to think of other things. But no, they're good. I like being part of the union. There's a lot of I've had nothing but positive experiences being part of the union. I would say that I don't necessarily think you should join the union right away just because there are a lot of good non-union opportunities out there, and obviously you need to have a bit of a resume because once you join the union you're not allowed to do non-union work. So it's definitely not something that you should do like right away. It should be like a goal,
Mhm.
that you want to become a union member, like once you have XY credits under your belt. I don't know if that answers the questions enough.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. Um, cool. Yeah, I think that covered most of it. So thanks so much for coming. And
Yeah.
I'm going to pause out on the recording and we'll invite everybody back in and see if anybody has any questions. And we'll just chat here for a couple of minutes. But thanks so
Yeah.
much for talking with us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Sorry for like rambling.
Oh, no, it's all good.